in the third week of a series called Hello Neighbor, but really this kind of takes us all the way back to the beginning of the year as we've talked about what N.T. Wright calls a hope-shaped mission. We believe that part of what God has us doing is connecting our neighbors with the hope of the gospel. So 2 weeks ago, we started this series, and we talked about, what is it that Jesus sees as the most important thing? Jesus is pretty clear and pretty plain about it. Love God and love your neighbor. And then last week, we looked at, okay, if Jesus says love God and love your neighbor, which of your neighbors are we going to get to leave out of that? And we talked about the Good Samaritan. And it turns out that perhaps when Jesus says love your neighbor, he means your actual physical neighbor. And if you recall, last week we had a chart that we sent home with you. I think we've got a chart on the screen that some have called the chart of shame, which I found out that my son filled this out last week. And it turns out my son's a better neighbor than I am. But we're going to deal with that when I get home. So I hope that one of the things that you spent some time thinking about this week is how many of your neighbors do you know? If you weren't here, this is your home. Here are your 8 closest neighbors. 10%, less than 10% of Americans know the names of their 8 closest neighbors. And so I wish we had thought about it last week, but we didn't. So we're going to do it this week. I want to see how true that is. Take your smartphones out. If you have dumb phones, don't take them out. Take smartphones out. I know. I mean physically take your phone out, like get your actual phone out. And here's what I want you to do. If you're familiar with QR codes, you know how they work. Open up your camera. It'll open a link, and it'll take a one question survey. If you don't do QR codes, go to pigeonhole.at. Apparently that's a website, and you can enter this passcode, and then you can take the one question survey. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do it, because what we're going to see, we're going to put the results up live here in a minute. It's all anonymous. We're not going to know who you are. Don't worry about it. What I'm curious about is how many of our actual neighbors do we know? Now, I see some of you looking at me, which means you're not looking at your phone. I'm telling you, look at your phone. It's okay. Jesus will still love you, most likely, at the end of the day. And so this is the time to use your technology. Some of us are more comfortable. Some of us are less comfortable with technology. But take a look at it, and then in a second, we're going to put the results up because I want to see what the story is here. I got to tell you, at the 9:30 service, I'm not totally convinced they told the truth. Friends, it's anonymous. Nobody's going to know. Just be honest about how many of your neighbors do you know. How many of your neighbors' names do you know of your 8 closest neighbors? And then we're going to put this up and see what the story is. Are we ready? Are we ready to put it up? We're not ready. You need another minute? We'll give you one more minute, and then we'll see what happens. This is a test to see who's more Christian, 11 o'clock or 9:30. So don't mess this up, y'all. All right. It's not really a test. I'm kidding. All right. I'd say let's put it up. Let's go ahead and see. You can keep doing the survey if you want to. 40%? You're telling me that in America, 1 out of 10 of you knows all 8 of your neighbors' names, and 4 out of 10, 2 out of 5 of y'all know all of your neighbors' names? Who are you people? I'm very concerned about what's happening here. We are apparently an outlier community. I'll be honest, we're going to do this survey again in 1 year, and we will know if you lied. Okay? Look, the aim of the chart is not to make you feel guilty, and it's also, by the way, not to make you feel like you've done your job. The point of the chart is simply to be clear about the size of the opportunity that's around us. Even if 44% is going up, what's wrong with you people? This is terrifying to me. I don't know my neighbors like this. And so apparently, maybe I'm the one that's behind the curve. Anyways, so the point of this is to get to know the size of the opportunity that is around us. There are people who live next door to you whom you don't yet know. Even if 43%, that's the right direction, even if 43% of you know all of your neighbors, that means most of us still don't know all of our neighbors. And even if you are one of those liars who is saying that you know all of your neighbors, I would be willing to bet that you might know their names. But have you figured out yet, and have you had the courage to deploy all of your gifts and your resources to love them in the way that Christ intended? What we said last week is it's awfully hard to love someone if you don't know their name. Knowing their name is the starting point. If you're in that group that already knows the names, blessings to you. Keep doing the work of God. but it's not finished yet. And if you're in one of the groups that doesn't know the names yet, that's okay. Jesus still loves you. It's going to be okay. But it's time to start taking some steps. Now, as soon as we start kind of moving down this line, we immediately encounter some obstacles. And that's what we're going to spend some time talking about today is what are the obstacles that we typically face to doing this kind of neighboring work? Somebody gave me, after the first week of the series, somebody gave me a coaster that says this: Mr. Rogers did not adequately prepare me for the people in my neighborhood. Now, I don't think it was intended personally, but it's accurate. Mr. Rogers did not adequately prepare me for the people in my neighborhood. I love that. Some of you have been thinking about this whole neighboring thing, but as soon as you get ready to take kind of a step out the door, you realize there's a few, or maybe more than a few reasons why you don't actually want to do this kind of work. So we're going to talk about 2 or 3 of those barriers and whether or not they are actually a barrier to doing what Jesus himself has said is the most important thing for us to do: love God and love your neighbor. Here's the first barrier that I think most of us turn to first. Yeah, I just don't have time. I have so much going on in my life. And that's true. We do have so much going on in our lives. There is a lot happening around us. Do you remember in like the second half of the 20th century when they promised us that technology would save us time? Ha! Lies. It was all lies. Technology hasn't saved us time. Technology has packed more into our schedule. It hasn't saved anything. Our lives are overscheduled and overcommitted. It is our way of life. And in fact, most of us believe without questioning the lie that this is just the way life is. This is just how life is. It's overscheduled and overcommitted. There's nothing I can do about it. Most of us believe that without ever really questioning, is this the truth? And if we don't get tripped up there, we get tripped up in the second lie, which is the path to success, the path to fruitfulness, the path to fulfillment always travels through overscheduled, overcommitted, out of time. We believe that without questioning it too. That's why we sell our souls at work. We sell our souls with our family, and we run out of time without wondering if we're using that time well. The truth is, your time belongs to you. Your time doesn't belong to your kids. Your time doesn't belong to your employer. Your time belongs to you. So the question is, what do you want to do with it? You actually do have the time that you need to do what you want to do. Right? You make time. When there's something that you want to do, you make time. This is what we do. We make time to do things that we want to do. The question is, can we spill the hand sanitizer? The question is, what do we want to do? If we can make time for what we want to do, what is it that we want? There's a story that we looked at last week, the parable of the Good Samaritan, the story of the Good Samaritan. In the very next verse, we hear a story, and it's fascinating that Luke puts these 2 stories back to back because it meets this question so brilliantly and so beautifully that we can't skip it. If you have your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 10. We're going to look in verse 38. The parable of the Good Samaritan ended in verse 37. We're just moving on to the very next verse. It's a story that some of you may in fact be familiar with, and it goes like this. It's only 4 verses long, so I'm going to read the whole story to you, and then we'll talk about what this might mean for us. It says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Now she had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying, but Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to Jesus, and she asked, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister's left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me.'" Which I love this. Like maybe these are Jesus' kids. I don't know. Like, "Dad, tell her to help. Tell her to help me." That's what Martha says. But the Lord said to her, "Martha, Martha, you're worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken from her." I love this story because it's as relevant for us today. It's as familiar for us today as it would have been for them. Jesus, the Son of God, you may be familiar with Jesus, the Son of God, the Savior of the world, comes to Martha's house. And she wants that to be a great experience. She wants to show hospitality to Jesus. And that makes all the sense in the world. And so she's running around, and we don't know exactly what she's doing, but Jesus tells us she's distracted by her many tasks. She's getting the house clean, she's getting the meal ready, she's making sure everything's where it needs to be. And then is frustrated that her sister is not doing the same thing. Her sister, meanwhile, is doing what Luke tells us, sitting at Jesus' feet. And that's an image that might feel a little bit weird to us, because when you go to somebody's house, you don't generally, or when somebody comes to your house, you don't generally sit at their feet. But in biblical culture, it's an image for learning. It's an image of a rabbi, a teacher, a student, and a follower, right? To sit at someone's feet means simply to acknowledge their authority and to learn from them. What Jesus says is, Mary, you've missed the most important thing. It's not that what Mary is doing it's not that what Martha is doing is wrong or bad. It is a good thing to serve the people around you. It is a good thing to show hospitality. That's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, but it's not a great thing. What Mary has made space for is the great thing, right? Martha has sacrificed the great for the sake of the good. Mary has sacrificed the good for the sake of the great. I think that image ought to guide us as we consider, do we have time? Or if that's the real question, if we have time to do what we want to do, then how are we spending our times? Do we have time? The guiding image for us, I think, could be Mary and Martha. Are we willing to set aside good things in order to make space for the great things? I love the way Brian Mavis said it. I don't know who Brian is, but he said something cool, and I like it, so I'm going to tell it to you. He says, we really only have time to do a few things really well in life. So probably we ought to make sure that what Jesus said was the most important thing, love God and love your neighbor, is one of those things, that we take the time to do really well. I think that makes sense to me, and I hope it makes sense to you. Perhaps for some of us, it's time for us to reconsider how we are allocating our time. If we're not, in fact, locked into overscheduled, overcommitted lives, if there is another path to a fulfilling life, if that's not actually how everybody else lives, then what can we do to reconsider how we have used or how we are currently using our time? And by the way, as we do that, we might look at this not through the lens of convenience. I think this is where many of us get tripped up, particularly when it comes to following Jesus in our everyday life. Yes, but it's not convenient. You're right. There are times that it won't be convenient. And perhaps convenience is not the most appropriate lens through which we view how we spend our time and our life. So the authors of The Art of Neighboring, this book that I've told you about, the authors share a couple things, and none of this is innovative. It's probably stuff that you've heard before. Allow it to be a reminder if you've heard it before. And if you haven't heard it before, I hope this will be useful to you in reconsidering how you are spending your time. They say three things about time. First is keep the main thing the main thing. And that's something that's been said in a lot of different contexts. Let me be clear about what the main thing is. If you don't know what the main thing is, I'm going to tell you what the main thing is. And when I say I'm going to tell you what the main thing is, what I mean is I'm going to tell you what Jesus said was the main thing. Love God and love your neighbor. It's the main thing. If you are wondering, if you're a follower of Jesus and you are wondering what is the main thing for me to do, what is the main thing for me to be, it is to love God and to love your neighbor. Full stop. Keep the main thing the main thing. The second piece is eliminate time stealers. You know what they are? It's the tasks that Martha was consumed by. Eliminate time stealers that suck time out of your lives. Friends, if it is screens, get rid of the screens. Let's be realistic. Don't get rid of the screens. We can't live with them anymore. We can't live without them. Well, we can't live with them. If the screens are stealing time from you, reduce that amount of time that they're stealing. If there is a task that is taking too much of your time, either leave the task behind or find a different way to get it done. if it is a relationship that is taking an outsized proportion of your time, then perhaps it's time to reconsider that relationship. Keep the main thing, eliminate the time stealers, be interruptible. This is the hardest for me. When I say, today's the day that I'm going to build a table. I never build tables. This is an example. Today's the day I'm going to build a table. If I say today's the day I'm going to build a table, then it doesn't really matter what else happens around me. That's the only thing that I see. It's the only thing that I care about. Everything else is a distraction. Everything else is a hindrance. Everything else is an obstacle. That is not being interruptible. Because the truth is, all of us do this to a degree. We get our minds set on, yes, but today's the day I've got to run the errand. Today's the day I've got to clean this part of the house. Today's the day that I've got to take the kids to whatever. And when we refuse to see what's around us, when we refuse to be interruptible, we miss opportunities to do the main thing. Love God and love your neighbor. I like what John Ortberg has to say about this. He says, love and hurry are incompatible because love takes time. And the one thing that hurried people don't have is time. Friends, if your first response to Jesus' commandment, not Matt's commandment, Jesus' commandment, if your first response is, yeah, I don't really have time, perhaps it's time to reconsider how you are using your time. Is it consistent with what Jesus has called you to do? Here's the second barrier. Second barrier is related to fear. I think this one's powerful for a lot of us, right? And this isn't really all that surprising because, frankly, the 24-hour news cycle, Dateline, NBC, Netflix docuseries, true crime podcasts, social media. We live in a culture that seems to train us to view our neighbors as a threat. Everyone around us is a threat, especially the people who live closest to us. Here are a few examples that you might connect with. The single dude from down the street is probably on the crime registry. The children from the family next door who run around like terrorists are definitely being raised by meth heads. The unkempt yard a block over is a dead giveaway for a sociopath. The family with older kids down the street who's always got a little drama going on. Somebody's yelling in the front yard, somebody's screeching out of the neighborhood. You know the family. They are the reason why you will be the neighbor interviewed when their story goes viral for its insanity. Friends, we view the world around us through the lens of a threat. It is all around us. And frankly, neighboring is messy and it's difficult and it's a problem because it forces us to confront our fears. It forces us to confront what we are afraid of. And when we allow ourselves to be ruled by fear, then suddenly our perspective on everything is distorted. We've talked about this the last couple of weeks. When we have no connection with the people next to us, we have no understanding of what's going on, and fear increases, which only drives the loop. When our perspective is distorted by fear, we do things like this. In the absence of information, we tend to supply only negative information. And if you think you are exempt from this, I challenge you, sir, because of this. Nobody, when they see the unkempt yard down the street, nobody assumes, oh, well, that family is a family of missionaries who are feeding the hungry children and saving the souls of our community around us. You don't assume that. You know they're dope dealers, right? We have become consumed by our fear. And I do not believe that this is how God imagines that we would live our lives, by viewing his children as a threat. Now, use a discerning eye, right? Don't be dumb. Somebody answers the door with a knife and invites you in for tea. Don't go. But perhaps don't jump to conclusions every time you see a snippet from somebody else's life. Perhaps don't jump to conclusions that they're a serial killer. I want to read to you from Paul. I'll read to you a couple passages, actually, from the New Testament. And the reason that I want to share these with you, and we're not going to dig in deep to either of these passages, and I don't want you to feel like it's proof texting. I want you to catch a sense that we aren't the first group of people. We aren't the first generation of folks to struggle with fear in our lives. It turns out this has always been a barrier to being who God made us to be, to doing what Jesus has invited us, called us, commanded us to do. Here's a passage out of 2 Timothy chapter 1 in verse 7. It says, "For God did not give us a spirit of cowardice, but rather a spirit of power, a spirit of love, and a spirit of self-discipline." You can find statements like that all through the New Testament. I invite you to go look for them. Paul recognizes that it is easy for us to succumb to fear because it is such a primal instinct for so many of us. But he rightly points out that spirit of fear, or as he says, spirit of cowardice, has been replaced by the Spirit of God himself, which is a spirit of power. It is a spirit of love, and it's a spirit of self-discipline. When we allow fear to rule our hearts, we are erecting walls that keep us from being who God made us to be. Here's a correlated issue or challenge or barrier that I suspect a lot of us feel. It's the awkwardness barrier. Are you familiar with this? Yeah, I don't know. It feels like it'd be pretty uncomfortable because we've lived here 5 years and they don't know me and I don't know them. I think they're going to think I'm weird. I think they're going to think what I'm doing is strange. Let's be clear about what that is. All awkwardness is, all that kind of awkwardness is fear of rejection. And let me put your mind at ease. The worst that can happen, except in the case for the guy that answers the door with a knife, the worst that can happen is they just say no to your kindness. That won't make you feel good. I'll acknowledge that. That won't be the best feeling in the world. But the worst that can happen is they'll just say no or no thank you, and you will leave intact. You will survive that experience, and you'll know better how to do it next time. You will learn something in that failure if that's what happens. It will be okay. Awkwardness is not an insurmountable obstacle for you. I want to read you one more passage. This is from 1 Peter in chapter 3, verse 13. Again, I just wanted to offer a couple passages that give you a sense that folks 2,000 years ago were struggling with the same kind of fear that you and I are struggling with too. Now, who will harm you if you are eager to do what is good? But even if you do suffer for what is right, you are blessed. Don't fear what they fear, and don't be intimidated, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Sometimes when we put ourselves out there, things do get messy. Don't fear what they fear. Here's the last barrier that I want to talk about. And this one is maybe the most insidious. And this one is the one that I think for many of us is perhaps hardest to overcome. It goes like this: I don't want to. Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor. Yeah, I kind of don't want to. If that's where you are, no shame or judgment. If that's where you are, I'm not here to call you out. I'm not here to make you feel bad about yourself. My family will tell you there are multiple times where I just don't want to. But if that is your response, if that's your gut response right now, I beg you to consider, is Jesus your Savior and Lord? If he is your Lord, that means that he guides your life. That means he leads your life. And you have declared, perhaps even publicly, that you will follow Christ. And if Jesus has said the main thing is to love God and love your neighbor, and your response is, I don't want to, then have you declared that Christ is your Lord by the way that you live? If the answer is no, this is an opportunity. If that's where you are, You're not going to hell. You haven't been a failure. You're not the worst person. You still belong in church. But is it time to reconsider? To what degree am I following Christ today? If I don't want to, is your biggest obstacle? It's time to check your heart and start down a new path. Let me put it this way, and then I'll finish. None of these obstacles are insurmountable. None of these obstacles rule your life. None of these obstacles are forcing you into anything. But if you allow them to keep you from doing what Jesus has said is most important, then you are choosing to make that obstacle bigger than the God who made you, the God who calls you, and the God who equips you. And the truth is, no obstacle is greater than the God who made you. God will go with you. It will be okay. And you never know what might happen. You never know how you might change someone's life. You never know how you might be an instrument in the life of one of your actual neighbors that saves a life, perhaps saves an eternity.